Again, thank you all for coming. My name's Al May. I'm the district liaison for the Down East District. That's Hancock and Washington counties. And I think you all know Heather Snaff, who is our local health officer coordinator. She's been doing a great job over the last couple of years, really organizing these webinars, getting some great speakers like today's speaker, Craig Lapine from DACF, Department of Agricultural Conservation and Forestry. And just a reminder again, please add your name, title, and town in the chat. Let's see. We do have a few other folks from Maine CDC on the call today. We have Jessica Fogg, who is the district liaison from Penquist District. That's Penobscot and Piscataquis. Drexel White, who's from the Midcoast District. And Drexel covers Waldo, Knox, Lincoln, and Sagadahoc. And Stacy Boucher is our district liaison from Aroostook District, which is Aroostook County. I don't know if anyone else has joined us from the group. We'll take a look here as I go through. If other DLs come up, Heather, let me know, or other staff. We ask people to please mute yourselves during the meeting unless you have a comment or question. If you do, please use the raised hand. You can also use the chat, and we'll monitor the chat throughout the meeting. So if there's a question, and Craig is very open to taking questions as we go along. So that's fine. But again, use just some manners. We want to make sure people don't talk over each other. So again, use the raised hand or the chat, and we'll monitor those. We ask please that one of the things that we do in this is an open meeting and it's recorded, but we do ask that you remember privacy. So if you have a story to tell about your town, about a certain situation, we ask that you please don't share public, private, or identifying information as a case study. So just kind of make sure you're kind of clean about that type of stuff and really careful. We don't want to share anything of that information out to identify or provide any issues for that person. It is being recorded, and all of the resources and the recordings of this meeting will be made available. Heather does a great job. Usually the following week after the webinar, she'll send out an email to all the registrants with the slide deck and all the other information from the meeting. And we certainly ask you, in case you know other folks that are interested in this topic, to certainly share the information with those folks in your town, other municipal officers, and other folks you know. A couple other brief announcements before we get going here. And there will be certificates of attendance given for this meeting. They'll be emailed to you. If you're on a phone line, which I don't see any, let us know who you are so we can get the certificate to you by email. Some upcoming webinar events. In November, we have the bedbug webinar with an expert from the Maine Cooperative Extension. There'll be an email that will go out maybe a week or two ahead of time, so you'll know. And in December, we have the Maine CDC disease surveillance update and sort of what emerging infectious disease are out there to consider for the area. And also, Heather has created on the webinar on the Maine CDC LHO site a calendar, and it's on the resource page on the Maine CDC LHO website. So the links for these webinars will be there, so you can always make sure you go there in case you miss something, and you can register for those through the link there also. Heather, am I missed anything? Anything else you want to share before we get started here? She's got her thumbs up, so I guess that means okay. So again, just a reminder for folks, mute your phone, mute your cameras. Geez, I can't speak. Mute your microphones. Make sure you identify yourself in the chat as far as who you are. And today we have joining us is an introduction to the Maine Bureau of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Resources, including what they do and when to connect. And we have Craig Lapine, who's the Bureau Director, and I'm going to turn it over to him. And as I said, he's happy to answer any questions during the presentation. Again, try to use your raised hand or chat for that. And I'll hand it over to Craig. Thanks.
Thanks, Al. Thanks, Heather. My name is Craig Lapine. I am the director at a bureau called Agriculture, Food, and Rural Resources. Um, and Heather reached out to me originally, I think, because we do have some public health functions. Um, and I also know that many of you wear many different hats in your municipalities. And we've got crossover with municipalities in a variety of different ways. Um, so I wanted to maybe just use today to provide sort of a high level view of the Bureau and what I understand some of the touch points with municipalities and with public health to be. Um, there are many as I prepared for this presentation, I realized there are many things that we could go pretty deep on. So this is not going to be encyclopedic. It's going to be fairly high level. Um, but hopefully what you'll leave with today is a broader understanding of our work and how we may intersect with your work, and also some contacts to follow up more with. I'm going to start my slide deck. So again, the shop that I run is called the Bureau of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Resources. Um, and this is what we do. Um, you'll see, we seek to ensure a healthful, abundant, and accessible food supply, and that health piece is important. And then we also have this part of our name is rural resources. The strength and vitality of rural communities and where our food is produced is also very important to us. Um, so I do not need to read that to you, but here's where we live. So we live within the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And we are the Bureau of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Resources, and that confuses people sometimes. This bureau used to be a cabinet level department, and then it was combined with some other natural resource agencies a few administrations ago. So there's a Department of Ag and there's a Bureau of Ag, um, and I run the Bureau of Ag, and then there are um, four main divisions within, and I'm going to just paint a picture of each because each has its own. I'm not going to go terribly in depth on any one, but each one does have some either public health functions or places where they intersect with municipalities. So we've got quality assurance and regulation, or QAR. We have our animal plant health division, ag resource development, and then most recently, PFAS response has been functioning since about 2019, but only as of September 24th is it recognized in statute as a division of the Bureau. There are also two quasi-independent commissions that live in this Bureau just for administrative purposes, and that's the Maine Harness Racing Commission and the Maine Milk Commission. Not really going to speak to them, but I just want to acknowledge them. So the first place is QAR, Quality Assurance and Regulation, and these are the food safety folks. And I think we share food safety with DHHS, and our mandate is to enforce aspects of state and federal food safety laws. And that just involves food in commerce. So if you are preparing food for sale, then you come under our jurisdiction. If you're in a restaurant, it's DHHS, but if it's a retail shop or a processing facility of any kind, from a home kitchen to a huge meat processing plant, those fall under QAR's jurisdiction. I'll also mention that there are lots of things that aren't covered by food and commerce. bake sales, if you're doing things for your friends and neighbors, that is not an issue that we get involved with. It's just food in commerce. Um, Food safety laws are incredibly complex. There's a layering, as this slide says, we are implementing federal law, and then there's the Maine state food code. Um, it can be complicated, but I think we really approach it when we're talking about processing, and if you've got processing facilities in your jurisdictions, you know, it really kind of comes down to these three questions. Do you have a facility and the necessary equipment to process food safely? Like, is there just a physical place where it's even possible to safely to produce a safe food product? That's one thing that we look for, is the physical plant. The other thing is, if you've got that space, do you know what you're doing? Um, do you have a HACCP plan? Just basically, do you have the training and the skills so that you've got a space that could do it and you know how to do it? That's great. If you can clear those first two questions, you are likely to be able to get a license. And the third is, are you communicating completely and accurately to the people who may buy and consume your food, like with what is in it, what's it made out of? Because labels are one of the ways that we kind of oversee and regulate food safety, to make sure you've got a clean enough space to do it, you know what you're doing, and that the product is correctly labeled. I will say that we really try to take an educate first and regulate next approach. I think personally that the home kitchen license for $35 is about the best $35 you can spend, because you get a ton of technical assistance and training from our staff. And if you are launching a home food business, I think we really do. We have these dual missions, I will say, within the Bureau. On the one hand, we absolutely need to uphold food safety, and anybody who's eating food in the state of Maine is our constituent, and that's not negotiable. At the same time, we are also stewards of the ag and food economy. And so we really want people who are in this space to succeed. So we often link our regulatory functions, or we augment our regulatory functions with some technical assistance and training. Also, our approach to food safety often involves what I think of as kind of concentric circles of risk management. If, for example, you're processing under 1,000 chickens a year in your slaughter facility, the regulations are different than if you're processing 100,000 birds a year, because quite honestly, you can make fewer people sick. And we're open to somewhat not relaxed, but just more casual ways. We realize that with most food safety, there may be multiple ways to do it right, and we want to find a way that works for the processor. The original the original reason that Heather invited me to make this presentation, because she had heard that you all were getting questions about Maine's newly established constitutional right to food. I have to say that I am not actually going to be able to say much about this. One of the things that my department flagged when this was being considered in the legislature was that often the breadth and depth of constitutional rights only get established through litigation in the courts, and we don't always know the full meaning when they're promulgated, and that is true here. We particularly flagged this word that I've highlighted in the constitutional amendment, consume, right? So All individuals have a natural, inherent, and unalienable right to food, including the right to save and exchange seeds and the right to grow, raise, harvest, and produce the food of their choosing for their own nourishment. We were 100% on board up to that point. And then we just flagged that the addition of consume could conceivably bring into question our ability to regulate food safety. Not and that yeah, that we just flagged that, and that we didn't know exactly what it meant that people had an inalienable right to consume the food of their own choosing. Um, and indeed, now that question has come up to a degree. There's a case, Oliver versus the city of Calais, um, and the courts will, for the first time, have an opportunity to weigh in on what it means. So, if you attended hoping for clarity on the constitutional right to food, I'm afraid I'm not going to have good answers for you today. I will say that that right to food in many ways is an evolution of something that has been the case in Maine for a while, which is this idea of food sovereignty. Um, and you all have probably encountered this concept. And the one thing, well, I'll say a couple things about food sovereignty. So, generally speaking, Maine already has a culture and approach that people um, can produce and consume, on their, can produce for their own consumption. Lots of things they can exchange with their neighbors, um, and food. And we now do have a food sovereignty law um, that, in certain circumstances, kinds of voids or loosens food safety regulations. And what happens in that regime is that food sovereignty, for food sovereignty to apply, municipalities have to adopt in. They have to adopt a food sovereignty ordinance. So it's not generally the law of the land. Your town needs to actually adopt a food sovereignty ordinance. And then what will happen then is that some food producers and sellers from some, are exempted from some food safety regulations in some transactions. And the working premise until very recently, and it's still largely enacted, is that you have to have a face-to-face exchange between the buyer and the seller, and this idea that if the state is not going to step in to assess the safety of how a product was produced, the consumer needs to have access to that information just by being able to be there and look around and making their own kind of risk management decisions. Like, yeah, this seems like this farmstead or wherever we are seems to be a place that they could produce a healthful product. One thing that has definitely been confusing, but I'll restate it here, is that food sovereignty never exempts meat and poultry regulations. Meat and poultry, and that is baked into the food sovereignty architecture, is that there aren't any exemptions for meat and poultry. Part of that is because farmers in this state and meat processors like the fact that the state has a meat and poultry program. It's easier for them to get in touch with us than with the USDA. We implement our meat and poultry processing program operates under delegated authority from the USDA, and the USDA has made no secret of the fact that if we don't uphold their standards, they will take that away from us. And so there's been great consensus that the meat and poultry producers don't want the exemptions for food sov there because they want the state to be able to be their inspector and regulator.
Craig,
Yeah.
the last thing talked about the sovereignty, and it said municipalities, and the question was, how does this affect unorganized territories in Maine? Does this food sovereignty apply to UTs? Does LUPC come up with anything on this?
I believe in the last legislative session, this was amended slightly, and my recollection is that it is now adoptable on a county-wide basis. I think that was the workaround that they arrived at.
Thank you.
So QAR, the division director is a woman named Celeste Poulin. And this is her contact info. In addition to what we've just talked about briefly, so consumer products, so she's got inspectors in retail establishments. They're folks looking around, is everything that's for sale properly labeled and licensed? If you want a commercial kitchen, um, meat and poultry inspection, and that is both for slaughter and for processing, lives in this shop. Um, all of the folks who ship milk, and even and Maine is one of the very few states that actually provides a registration for raw milk producers as well, which the federal government has, at least until pretty recently, frowned upon. We've got dairy inspectors, and we license dairies. Like by and large, vegetables are an unregulated product, unless you are producing on a very large scale and you want to like sell to schools, or if you're exporting. So we do have a fruit and vegetable inspection program, but most of the fruit and vegetable growers that you probably come across in your own communities aren't part of that. By and large, as I said, vegetables are not a regulated product. We're also the folks who regulate scales and weights and measures and put the stickers on gas pumps. So my commissioner, Amanda Beal, among her many, many titles, one of them is state sealer. So if you've got a retail establishment, anybody using a scale in commerce in your town, at least once a year, our inspectors are supposed to be there and make sure that people are getting what they pay for when they buy a pound of whatever. So again, Celeste is the person who runs that division, and there's her email, and everyone will get the deck. But if you have any more specific questions that at the end of the day here I can't answer, she's a great resource, and I'm happy to make those connections. The next division is animal and plant health. And this is where a lot of our scientists and subject area experts are. So animal and plant health upholds animal and environmental health, while also, again, we have this dual loyalty, if you will. We're trying to support producers, so we really want to help people get into compliance, but we will close people down or what have you if they can't get into compliance. And the animals themselves are constituent of our bureau. So we do have animal welfare and animal health. The state veterinarian lives in this division. Also, these are also the folks that are trying to make sure that invasive species aren't coming in and kind of corrupting Maine ecosystems. There are, in animal welfare, I'm sure all of you are familiar, you may be your ACO, I don't know. But dog licensing and kennel licensing and the certification of animal control officers are in the animal welfare shop, and they're part of the work of this bureau. I always like to remind people, well, why do we do that? And that really comes back to the fact that since the late 19th century, when dog licensing began in New York City, it really all comes down to rabies, and that rabies has been a public health threat, and that is really the reason that animal welfare programs exist or came into existence. And we know, certainly I heard from many of your colleagues, when we implemented a legislatively required platform to have an electronic dog licensing system. We're now 13 months into that. I hope that that has been ironed out in most of your municipalities, but if anybody in your town is struggling with that, they can certainly reach out to me, and we are trying to support towns in getting on board with that. Something else that lives within animal and plant health is ag compliance. And Maine has what's called a right to farm law, the Maine Agricultural Protection Act. And what we recognize, or at least, yeah, in farming, there's rarely just one right way to do things, but there are right ways to do things, and there are wrong ways to do things. And the way the right to farm law works is if you are using what is recognized by the department as a best management practice, that shields you from certain kinds of nuisance complaints. But if you're not using a best management practice, then you are open to any kind of complaint. And so, if you are getting odor or noise complaints about a farm, please do reach out. We can do a couple of things. We can help the farmer maybe find a different solution. And it is also true that if the farmer is doing everything right, Maine law provides a lot of protection for them to keep doing what they're doing. A big part of that is DEP for some of their water management regulations for groundwater and surface water. They have delegated oversight of those regs to DACF as long as the farmer is following what are recognized as best management practices. If the farmer's not, then there's really then whatever other regulations would kick in if they're not following best management practices. So Megan Patterson is the director of animal and plant health, and that is her contact information. Again, ag compliance is there, plant health, so things like the state arborist, nursery regulations, the beekeepers are there. Animal health and animal welfare. It's also where pesticides are. And for those of you who are this program is mostly located out of Presque Isle. For those of you up north in the county, we also certify seed potatoes is one of the programs there. And then the next is ag resource development. Ag resource development is really our economic development arm. So I talked about the push and pull. Sometimes in one of our programs, we're going to be regulating a farm, but in another program, we may be trying to support the viability of that farm, and farm viability is absolutely central to our mission. A lot of those support programs live in ARD. So we do things like, try to help Maine farmers and food producers get access to new markets, grow the markets that they're in, provide all kinds of financial and technical assistance programs like our Healthy Soils program and our Ag Food and Forest Products Infrastructure Investment Fund. Give farmers tools so that they can succeed. Because by and large, the business model that's available to farmers is not great. But we say we value, and we certainly at the department very much do value the role that agriculture plays in the state economy and in our communities. We want these farms to succeed. And so we've got programs to try to help them do that. This is also where, and it's not exactly square hole round peg, but it's also where our food security programs live. So we distribute food to the pantry networks throughout the state. We run our own programs like Maine Senior Farm Share that distribute food to that one is for low income seniors. So in addition to supporting farmers, we also try to connect people with food, particularly Maine food. And so those food access, food security programs live in this department. One thing that, if not you directly, then somebody in your office probably knows, and this is another touch point with municipalities, is that if a town is thinking about enacting an ordinance that affects farms, the town is supposed to run it by us, and that gives the commissioner an opportunity to weigh in about whether the proposed ordinance would impact the use of best management practices. I guess one thing that I will say about this is that it doesn't, at the end of the day, DACF does not have the authority to prohibit a municipality from enacting anything, but it does require that the municipalities share their intentions and give the department a chance to weigh in. And that has been true for decades now, I think. Well, it looks like it says 2015, so a decade. And the person within our bureau who mostly supports that is a woman named Miriam Talib. I will also say, and I discovered just in preparing this, that it's not up on our website, but I will try to have that resolved before you get the rest of your materials, is that we have collaborated with Maine Farmland Trust on a policy and planning guide for Maine towns called Cultivating Maine's Agricultural Future. And if you are interested in making your making your town farm friendly or more farm friendly, there are some sample ordinances there, and there's some strategies that it suggests that you could take if you want to try to support the farms that are already in your town, or perhaps attract more farms. Michelle Webb runs that division of ag resource development. There's her email address. And again, these are just some of the programs there that live in that shop. And then the last program is PFAS response. And this is the newest program, the newest division within the Bureau. And if a farm has been identified as being impacted by PFAS contamination, we have financial and technical assistance tools to help that farm stay in production or pivot to a different kind of production. Of course, we also are very concerned about the safety of the food supply. And so one of the things that we are working on, or will be working on, that program just got recognized in statute in the budget that became effective September 24th. So one of the things that program is now going to be working on is developing action levels for different kinds of foods. So there's clarity both for us and for producers about when, what level of PFAS concentration is unsafe for human consumption, and when will we have the authority to pull those off the market. One thing I really want to say in this setting, because I think a lot of the reporting around PFAS has been maybe not complete. We are in relationship with 100+ farms that have experienced some degree of PFAS impact. All but 5 have either been able to keep farming safely or return to farming safely. And I think that's a little bit of an untold story, and it's something that I'm proud of my team for doing. But, farms in Maine go out of business for all kinds of reasons. And if you took any slice of 100 farms from 2019, I think more than 5 would have probably gone out of business at this point. So we have managed with this program and this support program to make PFAS contamination not at all a death sentence for the farm, but actually something very much that can be overcome, and that the family and the people that are farming can be safe, and the food can be safe, and those farms can stay in production. Megan Hennessy is the woman who runs that program, and there's her email address. And I mentioned that action levels is going to be one of the big things that they're working on in 2026.
So Craig, we got a couple of questions on this
Sure,
area.
go ahead.
Let me read them off. So Sherry asks, PFAS is known to never leave the soil. What about those growing food for public consumption on known land that was PFAS contaminated?
So a couple of things there. The shorthand for PFAS has been, the nickname is forever chemical. And that is true. It is true that they are very persistent. But what is also true is that there are various strategies that you can do to make sure that PFAS is not getting into the food that you are growing. So, for example, and don't quote me on the exact crops, but this is generally true, that any contaminant in the soil, if it's PFAS, if it's lead, if it's something else that has been introduced, leafy green vegetables just are really good at pulling things out of the soil. And so sometimes those unhealthy things accumulate in them and in those parts of the plants that human beings like to eat. That is not true quite often for the fruiting part of the plant. And so, again, just don't take this as a business model, but if you were growing kale on some land that had detectable levels of PFAS and you wanted to pivot to tomatoes, it is very likely that the tomatoes would have no detectable level of PFAS in them, even when the kale did. And so, and that is why we're developing action levels and making sure that any of the food that comes off a farm is safe. So, there's certain things like the way that this showed up in Maine, the way that it was first detected was in milk. And we do know that cows, if they're getting feed that is contaminated, if they're grazing on fields that have been contaminated, that the milk does build up PFAS, and that can be a dangerous pathway for consumers. But we have learned a lot about how to substitute the feed, how to depurate the animals is the term of art, so bring their contamination levels way down, and so that there is nothing detectable in the milk that they're producing. So Maine has been out in front of this. We've learned a lot about how to keep both the farmers and the food consumers and the farm animals safe. So I do think that there are pathways, and it's a concern. But it's not, I hope you heard me say it, it's not a death sentence to the farm. We really have great tools now to help farms pivot.
Yeah, sort of a follow-up to that question. Has there been consideration to labeling requirements? I guess if the soil has some PFAS, would you put that on your label if you're selling products from the land? I think that's what, and Jennifer
Yeah.
maybe want to come in and ask that question. I don't know if I'm picking up exactly what you mean, Jennifer.
What I will say is, and sorry, Jennifer, I'll let you ask the question again, but I guess we've taken a slightly different approach, which is to make sure that the food does not have anything detectable. And if it doesn't, or if it's within the safe levels, then we're not pulling that food off the shelf. And if it's not, then we are. And that's been the approach, rather than sort of labeling the entire farm.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
And you're still there, Jennifer. So you have another question. Are there resources we can point homeowners to who have questions about PFAS contamination to wells supplying drink water? And this may be more of a drinking water program, but I'll let you answer, Craig. What do you have anything that, because we get a lot of people asking about wells, and my understanding, the well water test for PFAS is quite expensive, and it also has to go to a specialized lab, which I don't think our state lab doesn't even do PFAS for wells, I don't believe.
You were right, Jennifer, I think when you suggest this. So that is a DEP question.
Mm.
And there is, so, and farms are usually people's homes as well. So sometimes there's an overlapping jurisdiction, right? Where if there is a farm business there, we do get involved. We can sample the wells, we can sample the soil. If it is just a private home, then it is very much DEP's jurisdiction. And a couple things that I would say, you're right that the testing can be expensive, but if there is a documented history of sludge spreading, then I believe DEP will pick up the tab. I mean, if you're just a homeowner who's worried, but there's no necessarily reason to suspect that there's PFAS on your land or in your well, then you are, for better or worse, you are on your own. But if there is a documented history of sludge spreading, not only will DEP pick up the tab, I think they're required. I mean, they are actively working their list of sites to make sure that, and they are doing testing when there is a suspected, when there's a suspected site of contamination.
Does that include if it is, so say the homeowner is next to a farm that is a known site where sewage or where sludge was spread in the past, does that fall under DEP, or does that then fall under the PFAS response if it's not the homeowner's property, but their well is being impacted by an adjacent property with a known issue?
That's a good question. I think as long as it's not a farm, or perhaps more importantly, there's certainly cases where farms have been subdivided and it was a farm, and when the spreading occurred, but now it is not. I think in those cases, it is if it's no longer part of the farm, it is DEP's jurisdiction. And if it was never part of the farm, I guess what I would say is it's DEP's jurisdiction, but there's also, and I could arrange, if this was a subject of interest, a presentation just from the PFAS response team. But I don't believe we've seen cases where the contamination has traveled distances in that way, so that, assuming the well was not really at the spread site, that would be an issue. But I'm a little bit over my skis with that one, and so would need to probably get someone from the PFAS response program to respond.
Okay.
And then Laureen says, what's considered safe levels of PFAS? And I guess I just did a quick scale on EPA has safe levels for drinking water and PFAS. I'm not sure what you do for soil. There must be a different contamination level for soils. We're hearing most of the issues, right?
And what we're actually developing are action levels for food. And so, and we do use a CDC model. And so some of you are probably more familiar with it than I am, but we take it sort of crosswalks the level of contamination with how, generally speaking, how much of this food people eat and at what frequency. And that is determined the action levels. So something like eggs which is a fairly common food and ingredient, might have a lower action level, meaning we would pull eggs out of commerce earlier than we might pull something like liver, which people don't necessarily eat a lot of. And so there are all of these kind of actuarial tables that crosswalk those things. And so they're going to be different. So there isn't a single answer for what is safe and what isn't. But again, seems like this is a topic that where there's a lot of interest, and I'm sure that Megan Hennessy or someone from her team would be happy to do one of these things in the future if that was helpful.
Yeah, and I just found the EPA drinking water regulation standards for the various. So the issue with PFAS, of course, is not just one compound; it's multiple compounds. So the email that I just or the link that I just put in shows the different types of PFAS substances and what the regulations are for the MCLs, which is the maximum contaminant level. I will say though, you have to understand that the people that are typically using this are your community water systems because they have to meet this under regulation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. But in Maine, where we have most of over 55 to 60% of the people on their own wells, they don't test. So we don't know if they have PFAS or not. So this is a real interesting question that needs to be really talked about more, I think. So, but let's get back. Actually, I have one more question for Craig. You sort of answered it, but if there was a risk assessment checklist for a homeowner, for example, when someone wants to do an organic farm, they have to follow a procedure, a long checklist, and it says, you haven't had pesticides for 3 to 5 years, you haven't done this. Is there something that's something a homeowner or a local farm or town might use to consider that? And obviously, you already said sludge, so that's obviously the big risk factor. But are there other risk factors to consider? Or is there a checklist for people to look at to see what the risk is for their homes?
There's not that I'm aware of,
Okay.
but the main, yeah, sludge has been the main kind of culprit in what we see in Maine. There are other issues. We had that incident in Brunswick not too long ago, where that sort of pointed out like a proximity to a military base or firefighting equipment. Those are some other known risk factors, but I haven't seen a checklist. And again, because this is the PFAS response program within the Bureau of Agriculture, we've been very much focused on contamination on agricultural soils, and almost invariably the source of that has been sludge spreading.
Sludge.
So if you are, if you're in a residential neighborhood and it got there in some other, or just a rural community, as you said, unlike most other states, so many people in Maine get their water from wells. That, yeah, if there are other sources, I guess I'm less aware of them.
Okay. We've got about 10 minutes. We'll better let you get back to your presentation.
I've got 2 more slides left, so that's perfect. Yep. And this is just wanted to not shortchange my colleagues in the Maine Milk Commission and the Harness Racing Commission, but just to say again, said this at the outset, there are 4 divisions within the Bureau. We also have these quasi-independent commissions that kind of, for administrative purposes, live within the Bureau, and they do interesting work. I don't know that I was having a hard time thinking of crosswalks with your work. But again, my point today was that recognizing that there are many potential touch points between municipalities and the Bureau, food retailers, food processing businesses. If you've got a food sub ordinance or you're thinking about one, any ordinances that impact farms that we do ask that you share with us in advance, dog and kennel licensing, nuisance complaints, all and more. And so just the invitation is, this is me, Craig Lapine. You can reach out to me and I can try to connect the dots with the content area experts um, if that is helpful. And that was really it.
Thank you very much, Craig. Is there any other questions for Craig? We're getting to the end here, but we still have a little bit of time. If folks have some questions, raise your hand or just pop in. Not seeing anything. So I want to make sure that the webinar is coming to a close. We ask you to please complete the evaluation. Heather has put it in the chat. We will certainly, all this will be coming to you again. Heather will follow up with a email to all the folks who registered for this meeting with the slides and any other resources that may come out in the chat. And again, thank you very much, Craig, for coming to us today and presenting. Very interesting. I will tell you that I work with one of your divisions, the beekeepers, because I get a beekeeping license every year. So, and the apiarist has been great. You've had two over the last 20 years, and both have great experience and expectations and do wonderful things, especially in the rural areas. So,
Okay, thank you for that. I will relay that to Jen Lund, our state apiarist. And I would say,
yeah, she knows me.
yeah, I'll just say, we've got a lot of great people working in the division, in the bureau. I don't know any are more beloved than Jen. She really is strongly connected to her regulated community.
She gets her hands, I'm not going to say she gets her hands dirty, she gets her hands full of honey and bees. So she's very, very good about getting out to folks and really helping out with the beekeeper. So everybody's saying thank you in the chat, so I'm not seeing any more questions. So Heather, anything left from you to any announcements or anything you want to add to the meeting today?
All good. Thanks.
Thank you all again.
Thanks,
Please
Craig.
take the evaluation, and we will see you potentially in a month with our next webinar. Have a great day. Oh, Chris has got a question. Go ahead, Chris. Can't hear you, Chris.
Nope, I'm sorry. I think I hit the wrong button. I'm sorry.
There we go.
Oh no, it's Chris.
Different Chris.
Oh, okay.
Back to the
Chris.
topic of farms, and as long as they have best management practices, they are generally to be left alone. If you have a farm in your area that has a nutrient management plan that the farm then doesn't have to share with the town, how are we supposed to know that they're following said plan and using best management practices?
Fair. I think if you reach out to Mark Hedrick, who runs that nutrient management plan, or reach out to me, we can certainly affirm whether they are or not following the plan. And in any event, I think the regime is an interesting one because we aren't actually regulators. What the arrangement with DEP says is if people are following best management practices and there isn't any contamination, any bodies of water aren't impacted, then they need to be left alone. But of course, if there is an impact, then they need to correct that. And so if you've got reason to think that there's a negative impact, we certainly want to know about it. Because you're only exempt from you're only exempt really from nuisance complaints. But if you are actually degrading the environment in some way, then that doesn't exempt you.
Then on that note, can you share your email address one more time?
Sure. I'll put it in the chat. And it's just my name, Craig Lapine, Lapine @maine.gov. I hope that's helpful.
I had a situation here in down east. Had a woman, an older woman, had her house, and she, for some reason, was being sick. And the family members who were checking on her said, "There's something wrong here. She just seems to have bacterial infections. We can't figure out what's going on." And the LHO went out there and took a look and really couldn't figure anything out. And the woman said, there's a farm next door that they hadn't been doing much, and now they're doing more things. Is that a possibility? So this farm was actually about 100 feet above her house on a slope. And the farm animals at one time were not even close to the area there, but they moved one of the barns right on the property line above the hill where she was. And we were watching it, and her well, she had her own well. The well, for some reason, didn't stick up off the ground, so it was down in the ground. And when it rained and such, she had a puddle around the thing. Well, they tested the water around the well after a rainstorm, and it was full of bacteria and E. coli. So it was coming down from the hill from this new, so had to get ag out there, and they had to try to give these folks, and they had a best management plan, but it was still affecting. And the other thing we did is we got her well, got a well driller to get out there and put an extension on the well so it was above the ground, and also checked the consistency of the well going in the ground so it sealed it real well. And after that happened, it was better. We didn't have the issue. So some of those little things happen sometimes, and you just have to sort of do an investigation.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of one of the issues with best, or one of the practices that's looked at in a best management, in a nutrient management plan, is to make sure that that the drainage isn't off your property or into a water source. So they may have had a plan.
Right.
Maybe to Chris Bilodeau's point, it doesn't necessarily mean they were following it, or that it was, that it was
Yeah.
doing everything that it should have done.
Yeah. And sometimes in those farms, they don't think about where they're located and the neighbors, because they're sort of siloed on their farm, and they move animals around and don't realize when they move to geez, why don't we put them in this corner here where it's closer to the house? Well, it's also closer to other property people. So one more, it looks like, a question for you. What about backyard farmers? I'm not sure what backyard farmers, I guess that's like gardeners or people just have small animals. What about backyard farmers that have manure too close to the stream going to the river? Now that should be DEP also, I imagine.
It would be. There is a I don't remember what the number is, and this in some ways cycles back to the right to food and right to farm issues. There is a number of animals under which, again, the state just declines to regulate. And I don't remember what the cutoff is, but it is in statute. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry, it's not in statute. It's in rule about where it kicks in. Now, again, if you are actually causing a problem, that puts you in a slightly different category. If people moved next to you and didn't realize that cows smelled or that tractors made noise, then that is really on them. And the right to farm regs are supposed to protect you from those kinds of things. But if in fact if you are having impacts, then the regime is not really set up to, it's not supposed to protect you from that. You still have to abide by those other, make sure that you're not having those negative impacts.
Yep.
But they have to be more than, I would say, quality of life, noise and smell impacts.
Okay, well, we are at 2:01. Thank you all again for joining us today. Thanks, Craig, for all your information. And again, folks, make sure if you have a chance, fill out the evaluation, and we will see you in a month. Thank you very much. And thanks, Heather, for organizing this.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.